Well, for more on this, let's bring in Jim Walsh. He's an international security expert at the MIT Security Studies Program in Cambridge. Jim joins us. So, Jim, you know, as the North Koreans would say, the chief imperialist is on the way. But he's been more. Well, that's what they were to call it. That's what they have called him.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
But the president has been lowering expectations. So what do you think we can realistically expect to happen on Tuesday?
Well, I would hope that we get some joint communication that announces general agreements or areas to work out agreements on a peace treaty, on naval disputes, on denuclearization. But it might be pretty informal. But let me back up, Eric. Now, how many times have you and I talked about North Korea over the years? Dozens of times. And we are days away from a summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim. All eyes are going to be on Singapore. This is huge. It'll be must-see TV. And if the president comes out with something reasonably positive, I think it will be a big win for him.
What would be reasonably positive in your view?
Yeah, continuation of the moratorium on long-range missile testing and on nuclear testing. That would be great to freeze this in its tracks. I would expect that there's probably already been some work done. Yeah, as you well know, we've discussed this. The Korean War has never really ended. We had an armistice, no peace agreement. And my guess is that's going to be one of they'll announce something around that.
Well, when you say something,
I mean, in that direction.
When you say something, could they come out, you know, with their hands up, announcing that the armistice is over and that the war itself from 1953
Oh, yeah, I think
is
that's
over?
something. The North Koreans have wanted a peace treaty for a while, going back to the early years when I was there. When I met with Kim Dae-kwon, who's now, he used to be head of the Six-Party Talks, he's now foreign minister. When he and I sat across the desk from each other in the North Korean foreign ministry talking about issues and nuclear weapons, he was talking about a peace treaty then. Now, of course, everyone's definition of peace treaty is a little different, but I think that would be something they would welcome. But the main thing is starting a process of implementing a clampdown on the nuclear and missile program, and then slowly rolling it back as we take other steps that they're going to want us to take. But I think part of this is the relationship. I mean, This is one area where Mr. Trump and Chairman Kim have been saying similar things, which is if we get the relationship right, all things are possible. And that is somewhat of a shift in the U.S. frame.
Yeah, the president has said that if he sees the right attitude, if he recognizes, you could tell if he likes the guy in the first, minute when you meet somebody.
Exactly.
So, before we go further, tell me about your experience and what the North Koreans officials are really like when you sat across from them representing the government of the United States to them and how that went. Are they sincere? Are they genuine? Or are they just blowing smoke?
Well, first of all, I want to be crystal clear. When I was sat across from them, I was a private citizen acting in the capacity of a private citizen. Now, it is true that they told me things, and they knew that when I was going to get back to the U.S., I was going to report those things. That's how it works. That was during a period when we had no diplomatic relations, and they would often tell visitors things with the expectation that the visitors would pass them on to the government, and that's what I did. But our discussions, you'd be surprised how cordial they could be. And they're not dummies. They've had to deal with a very hostile environment for a long time. Now, there are certain lines you can't cross. You can't insult Chairman Kim. You can't, do things like that. But they were pretty frank, and they were prepared to talk about the issues. And at that point, this was way back in 2005, they were willing to move. And so we'll see if they're willing to move now.
Why would they be willing now, do you think, when, they scuttled the Six-Party Talks, 1994, the Clinton oil embargo, the food that went over, and they lied over that. And even George...
Well, that lasted 8 years. That lasted 8 years. I mean, I would take a freeze for 8 years, personally. I would take that right now. But you've asked me the hardest questions here, and this is the hardest question. Why are they doing that? And I wish I had a good answer. Obviously, one theory is they're just trying to play us, get an agreement, then the sanctions regime starts to fall apart and fray, and then they pull out, and they would have cashed in on, and it takes us a while to rebuild sanctions. That's a possibility. Maybe the young Kim, who does seem in some ways different than his father and his grandfather, maybe he's made some strategic a choice, about a pivot, and putting his country on a different track? You know, you just don't know. But that's the great thing about diplomacy. One of the great things here is we're going to put this to the test. We're going to sit down and we're going to be able to divine their intentions by seeing how they react to proposals.
You know, someone who had an inspired take is Holman Jenkins, is in the writing in the Wall Street Journal today. Let me read this about Kim Jong-un. He writes, he, meaning Kim, wants to live to be 95, large and in charge. Mr. Kim's big geopolitical concern is not and never has been the U.S., it's China. If China ever gets tired of the regime's existence, the lights go out in Pyongyang overnight. In effect, he wants the U.S. to become an undeclared patron and investor in the longevity of his regime for the reasons of geopolitical stability and to constrain Beijing. Do you see that? Do you think he's a younger generation, enlightened leader versus than what we've seen before, even though he's reportedly ordered the assassination of family members and the like, but that he's really he's looking over his back shoulder over Beijing?
You know, that's one possibility. I mean, that's the thing here is we've got a set of possibilities. We don't know which one is right. I mean, that has a logic to it. And I have heard North Korean officials sort of float in discussions the notion, citing Henry Kissinger, sort of floating the notion of, well, what if the U.S. and North Korea were buddies rather than North Korea and China? I have heard them say that. Now, is that what's really driving this at this point? You know, I have no idea. But I agree with the fact that certainly that the starting place here is you presume that autocrats want to hold power. I think that's where I'm starting from.
Yeah, his
and
survival.
they'll do what they can to hold on to power.
And finally, quickly, let me bring up, we always will, Otto Warmbier, the University of Virginia young man who was basically tortured and brutally beaten to death by the North Koreans. The president says he's going to bring everything up. Maybe the president's on Air Force One watching right now. Will he, should he bring up the issue of Otto and for Kim to prosecute those in his North Korean government and prison system who apparently killed Otto Warmbier?
Well, I think it's certainly appropriate for him to bring up the cases of all the detainees, you know, not just the one who died, but those who spent years in prison. And that should be part of a broader conversation. But it's also going to have to, he's also going to have to set priorities. So I think it's definitely appropriate to bring up. He should bring it up. But he's also got a nuclear issue to deal with, and that's pretty important too. And so, you know, I don't want to see another detainee in North Korea. You know, whether they're held in prison or whether they're injured or they die. So, obviously, that's important. But I must say, preventing a war is pretty darn important too. So that's probably where my focus would be.
Yep, a lot on the list. The nuclear issue, of course, number one. Jim Walsh of MIT. Always good to see you, Jim. As always, thank you.
Good to see you, Eric. Take care.
Arthel?